Môžem? Dobrý deň, drahí priatelia, kolegyne a kolegovia. Good afternoon, our guest speakers. And I am very welcoming to our country, and I hope that you'll have excellent afternoon with excellent presentation. And we will just translate to Slovak and introduce the speaker in our language, because it's a world language, but how our speaker will introduce you. Welcome here, and I will speak into the audience in Slovak. Takže ďakujeme pekne, vítam vás na 7. ročníku VITA-NOVY. A máme dneska zahraničné popoludnie, to znamená, budeme mať celú sekciu špičkových speakerov, ktorí majú dlhoročnú tradíciu so všetkými vecami, ktoré prednášajú. Ja som si tie prednášky veľmi teším na to, že v takomto, by som povedal, obmedzenom priestore budeme počuť v jeden deň ľudí, ktorí prednášajú na podujatiach, ktoré majú 10 000 poslucháčov, ako je Ešre a ďalšie. A títo ľudia prišli k nám do tejto väčšej obývačky, aby sa s nami podelili o svoje bohaté skúsenosti, za čo im veľmi pekne ďakujem a som veľmi rád, že sme sa tu mohli zísť. Takže otváram 7. ročník VITA-NOVY. Takže dúfam, že tieto dva dni sa budeme veľmi dobre cítiť tuto. Pozývam vás všetkých na galadinu.
Spend a nice time. For these 2 days, let me invite you to the gala dinner. In the first round, we shall listen to 4 presentations. After 4 presentations, there will be a break. For technical reasons, Professor Kotikya will have the presentation tomorrow at 11. So we will begin with the section with artificial intelligence, then immunology, then cryopreservation of oocytes. So these are 2 minor modifications of the agenda. We are glad to welcome again our dear guest and friend, Professor Borovský. He is a Slovak expert for gynecology, and Mr. Petrenko, the Slovak expert for assisted reproduction. Welcome. And I give the floor to Professor. Thank you very much, Peter, for your words. I just can say one thing. I would like to greet this audience and dear guests on behalf of the Slovakian Gynecological and Obstetrics Society. After 1 year of COVID, we have launched all the activities. We started in the Czech Republic. Almost every week we have events, and this is the event that has already a tradition. Also, due to Dr. Harbulak, and it has a high level, because without international guests it wouldn't be feasible, and I appreciate their presence here. The agenda is designed in a way that we have identified the goals for the future. We will speak about the freezing. Mr. Harbulak will speak about it. We had the COVID period, which was extremely difficult and demanding, and the committee of the section of the assisted reproduction has done a lot and has navigated individual centers how to proceed in difficult situations when we didn't know what to do and how to do. Therefore, I would like to express my thanks to this section because they have coped with this situation, and we had no problems in the assisted reproduction, and our goals for the future are really gorgeous. So let me wish success to this conference. Thank you.
they just will do it right now. And ideme otvoriť prvú sekciu.
We are going to open the first session dedicated to the luteal phase support. Veľmi pekne ďakujem, Peter. Som veľmi rád, že tu môžem opäť byť na 7. ročníku VITA-NOVY. Chcem len povedať, že
today, either here in person, but also remotely. And the first subject that we're going to deal with is one that has come back, I would say, into the spotlight, and this is really on the luteal phase. It's a critical part of the whole ART procedure, and recent work has shown that maybe we need to further optimize the way we support the luteal phase. So with that, I want to introduce the first speaker. The first speaker is Peter Platteau. He's actually here in the audience. It's great to see Peter here. Peter's had tremendous experience in this therapeutic area, and he's been trained in different countries, including the United Kingdom, which is very nice, and Australia. He's published widely. I think you've all seen papers published by Peter. So I just want to welcome him and also to start the session with luteal phase support, balancing effectiveness and safety. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Colin, for the nice introduction. Thanks very much. Okay. Thank you very much for the invitation here in this beautiful city, Bratislava. And I wanted to start, I think I'm from Belgium, and we have a little bit the same as I heard here in Bratislava. You see there this little spot there, that's Belgium. The star is Brussels, where I work. It's very, very small. You drive from Germany to France, you blink and you miss my country because it's so small. But as you can imagine, being so small, we've been invaded by all the neighboring countries for years and years. First ones we had were the Italians with Julius Caesar, the Romans. We had the French one with Napoleon. We had the Spanish ones. We had also the Scandinavian ones with the Vikings, long time ago. We had the Dutch ones. We had the German ones also, not so long ago. We're very upset with the English. I'm sorry, Colin, but can you see it here? Between England and Belgium, there's about 5-6 kilometers. Some people swim over it. They never invaded our country, as if it was not worth it. They went all over the place, but not that. But doesn't matter, because we didn't get them. We had, because of all this occupation, we have the best chocolates in the world. And you have to be a bit careful. The ones who are wrapped in paper, they are the ones who contain alcohol. So if you eat a lot of these number 11, for example, you get drunk just by eating chocolates. It's a very great feeling. But I'm not here to talk about chocolates and to make publicity for tourism of Belgium, but I'm here to talk about progesterone in this session. And I wanted to show you this slide first, which is quite interesting about the progesterone levels during pregnancy. And of course, we IVF specialists, we concentrate here on the beginning, but you see all over pregnancy, progesterone levels raise. And it's not like ACG. ACG, after a while, just goes into a plateau. Progesterone goes up till the end of the pregnancy, always, and then suddenly the delivery of the placenta, and then it goes down. And I think that's one of the explanations that women after 9 months of full progesterone, they feel a little bit funny after the first days after delivery. But you see that progesterone is very, very important, not only in our part, which we'll talk later, but also during the whole of pregnancy. And there are some studies, Kumarasamy made some studies about early miscarriage, that by giving some progesterone, you could avoid or diminish the risk of miscarriages. Further on, there are the studies, I think mainly American and South American studies, about giving progesterone to in patients who have a short cervix to protect them for preterm labor. And further on, there are some indications that it might decrease preeclampsia, and further on and further on. So we will talk of the first part, but there are a lot of papers there out and people who say that maybe we should look over the whole pregnancy and that there is an indication to give progesterone for the whole pregnancy. What is it, the progesterone? I first wanted to say something about pharmacodynamics. And here you see, for example, two molecules who look completely the same, although they're completely different. You have the natural micronized progesterone, and you have this synthetic retroprogesterone. Although they are the same in structure here, they have a complete different structure in vivo, and that means they're metabolized differently and they have different actions on our patients. Here you see also the different routes of administration, and I think it will come further in the next talks. But you see how important it is, the different way of administration. We have the oral ones, this is micronized progesterone, 300 milligram, the vaginal one. When you give 600 milligram, and when you look at the plasma levels, there, when you think, okay, the cutoff should be around 10, you get with 3 times 200 milligram, you get these cutoff levels. When you compare it then with the intramuscular injections, then you have it 5 times higher, these blood levels of progesterone, which is, I think, quite logic. But it shows you that the different pharmacodynamics according to the way you take the progesterone. And here you see it even more when you compare vaginal progesterone versus intramuscular progesterone, and you look at the plasma levels. Of course, when you give an intramuscular injection, the plasma levels are sky high compared to the vaginal intake of progesterone. But when you look at the other way, and you take some biopsies from the uterus, from the endometrium, and you look at the progesterone levels, you see if you give it intramuscular, it's very, very low. And of course, it's sky high when you give it vaginally. I think this is not rocket science, it's very logic how it goes. On top of that, when you give it vaginally, you have this counter-current effect of progesterone. What does it mean? Well, if you give the progesterone vaginally, the progesterone goes where it has to be, in the uterus, in the endometrium, and then through the veins, it goes out of the uterus. But because of these arteries nearby there, it diffuses again in the arteries and it goes back again in the uterus. So you have a double effect through the anatomy of the uterus. That's a little bit of pharmacodynamics. What about luteal phase in a natural cycle? Well, here you see a natural cycle, and I feel a bit embarrassed to show a natural menstrual cycle in front of hundreds of gynecologists. I'm sure that you know how it goes with the menstrual cycle, but I just want to accentuate this LH line, which is the blue line, which looks very straight. Then, of course, you have the LH peak, and then again straight. But in fact, it's straight, but it is not straight at all. It's an accumulation of LH peaks. And here you see, depending where you are in the menstrual cycle, in the beginning, in the late follicular luteal phase, that you have differences in frequency of pulses and also in amplitude. The reason why Mother Nature does it this way is that the half-life of LH is very, very short. It's about 1 hour, 90 minutes. So it has to give these pulses all the time, otherwise you will not have LH and you will not have a menstrual cycle either. But so these straight lines, blue lines, is in fact an accumulation of this LH. And it's this LH that gives us the luteal support. So where is the problem of luteal support? Well, it's everything that we do to interfere with these LH pulses during ovarian stimulation, for example. One of them typically is when we trigger with an agonist instead of ACG, which we do to prevent hyperstimulation. We know if we trigger with an agonist, we get a very little peak and a very short peak of LH. And that's interfering with this LH. And you can imagine that afterwards there are problems. So we have a problem with luteal support afterwards. We all know about that. And we know that we are a little bit in trouble if we have to do that and we want to give fresh transfers. A lot of people say we just freeze all, so we don't have this problem with luteal support. And anything else that interferes with these LH pulses gives us problems with the luteal phase. And mostly it is these supraphysiological levels of estradiol and progesterone because we bombard our patients with FSH, LH, and they have very high levels of estradiol and progesterone. And as you can see here, they have these negative effects on the hypothalamus and on the pituitary gland to produce the LH. So we cut off the LH, there are not pulses anymore, and we are in trouble with luteal support. And that's why when we stimulate our patients, we have to give them luteal support. And here you see very nicely, this is an old study where you see a natural cycle here, and you see the luteal phase, the progesterone levels here. Not stimulated cycle, the luteal phase is very, very nice, covers the 14 days, and we don't have a problem. This is a natural cycle. But when we stimulate the patient, then of course we have very high progesterone levels because there's many follicles. These progesterone levels make an inhibition to the hypothalamus. LH levels are going down, there is no support anymore, and we see after 8 days when the ECG injection of ovulation induction has gone, that the luteal support is going down, and it's these 4 or 5 days that are critical in IVF cycles that we have to cover to increase our chances for pregnancy. And here you see it very nicely. These are old studies. Pregnancy rates were very low at the time. But it shows something that we wouldn't do anymore now. But it shows, the difference between luteal support of progesterone and placebo. So these were randomized studies done long time ago. And you see the big difference between in live birth rate between the two. So it's very clear that if we give luteal support, we get a better pregnancy rate. I think nobody in this room will deny that these days. It also shows that although you give a placebo, that you still can get pregnancies. And I think that's very important to realize that, because a lot of these studies in efficacy in luteal support are done in IVF cycles, where we tend to forget that there's still a lot of pregnancies, although you shouldn't give anything. Of course, it's much better if you give something, but it means it's not zero. And I think the real good studies, and unfortunately there are not many, are the studies in frozen cycles and artificial frozen cycles, or in egg donation cycles, where if you don't give support, we know that the pregnancy rate is 0. And then you can really see the effect of one drug with the other one, which one is working. Unfortunately, in the luteal support world, there's not many studies like that. So what do we give? What can we give for luteal support? Well, we have vaginal preparations, we have injectable ones, intramuscular, subcutaneous, we also have oral ones. And here I will show you some of all meta-analysis, and it's getting boring, And what we did is we compared all sorts of preparations with each other and to see the efficacy. And here you see, for example, intramuscular versus oral, and you can see there is no difference at all in pregnancy rate. Next one is intramuscular versus vaginal or rectal. Some countries use it rectally, and as you can see, there is no difference in pregnancy rate. And it continues like that, vaginal versus oral, no difference. Low dose vaginal, high dose, no difference. Micronized versus synthetic, no difference. Vaginal ring versus vaginal gel, no difference. Subcutaneous versus the gel, no difference. Vaginal versus rectal, no difference. You know, I can go on like that. And I think, just to make it easy, from all these studies that we have, that you can conclude that there is not much difference in efficacy between all the preparations that we have there, vaginal, injectables, or oral ones. So, one little detail, but I don't want to take the meat from the next speakers here, is about progesterone levels during luteal phase. And this is a new thing, and the next speakers, I'm sure, are going to talk in detail about that. But it seems, and the philosophy is quite logic, that some patients have, although they take luteal support, the progesterone levels are very, very low, and this means that's the reason why their chances for a pregnancy are lower. This is one of the studies, a Spanish study, that shows this in oocyte donation cycles, and I think these are the patients where you have to do these studies, because without progesterone, they will not, this is an artificial cycle, they will not get pregnant, and they showed that if the progesterone levels on the day of the transfer is very, very low, that the chances for pregnancy are also much lower in this. There are many studies of that. I'm sure the next speaker will talk about that. Just to put already a little bomb on the next speaker's thing is about these progesterone levels. And here I show a Japanese study where they were using quite high dosages of vaginal progesterone. They were doing 900 milligram for every patient. And and for some reason, they said, okay, it might be not enough. They increased to 1,200 milligram. So that's 400 3 times a day. And they saw in this study, it was a retrospective study, that the 1,200 milligram was giving better pregnancy rates than the lower dosage. And just to confuse everybody is, they also did some progesterone levels on the day of transfer. And they saw that although the dosage that they were giving was 900, the lower dosage, the progesterone levels were much higher than in the group where they were giving 1,200. I think that's past this question for the next speaker. So coming back from all these luteal support, how do we prescribe this luteal support? You all in the room, you have these patients, what do you do? Well, I think the reason to decide what we give is one, efficacy. I showed you already there's not much difference between all these preparations. The price, I think they usually are a bit the same. There are some of them a little bit more pricey. Patient friendliness, of course. If you compare an oral one versus an intramuscular one, I think it's easy to choose. And then also, because we're talking about early pregnancy, the safety, teratogenicity. And that, I think, is a very important one that sometimes is forgotten a little bit. So what do we do? How do we prescribe it? Well, I went to a survey that's coming up every 2-3 years. And what happens is these are people are asking to different centers. They write to them and they ask them, what do you do for luteal support? When do you start? How much you give? What do you give? When do you stop? Etc. Which is interesting. So you have you know what people are doing in the world. And you can see here, it's all over the world that they contact the centers. And overall, all the people that have been contacted represent about 266,000 cycles. Each year a little bit different, but a lot of people. And what are the results? Well, here, and you see it now over 2012, 2019, and you see an evolution how we prescribe this luteal support. And the first question is, when do you start luteal support? And what you see here, that most people were starting on the day of egg retrieval, and you see an evolution that more and more people start a day later now, the day after pickup. I think this is logic. If you have to start using vaginal tablets after a pickup, there's still some bleeding there. It might be better and easier to wait a day and to start it then. So that you see from the evolution what we are doing with luteal support. When do we start? You see there are always some other people who do it differently, but this is clearly the big majority. Then the next question is, when do you stop? And here it seems that most people are stopping around 7-8 weeks of gestation. There's also a big group that goes till 10-12 weeks. Now, medically, and there is a beautiful study from Denmark that shows that once you have a positive ACG in a normal IVF cycle, you can stop luteal support. You don't have to continue. It's the placenta will take over, the ACG is there, you don't have to do it. And you look how many people are doing that when they stop before the pregnancy is confirmed, is here, it's about 15%, all the people from Denmark, I suppose. And we all are doing it this way. No medical reason for that. The reason, I think, is between the years, psychologically. If you stop, like in Denmark, on the first day of the pregnancy test, and then afterwards the patient starts bleeding and she miscarries, whose fault is it? Your fault, because you stopped these tablets and you didn't continue till 7 weeks. And I think this is the main reason why we continue till the patient sees on ultrasound the fetal heart, everybody is happy, and then you can say, okay, now we stop. It's just psychologically. But that's how it works. We are there to help these patients, and this is how it goes. And then the last question is, what do we prescribe? And here you see not much differences at all over the last 10 years. You see that most of us prescribe vaginal progesterone. Some of them are using a bit of combinations there, but then when you put this all together, you have nearly 100%. The ACG, I think, is from the old days. We don't do this anymore because of the risk of hyperstimulation. I think this is a good thing. Disasters happened before. The intramuscular subcutaneous one, as you see, is going down. I think the reason for that is not very patient-friendly. It's painful, these injections. And then the oral progesterone, which I thought was going to make it for the market because it's very patient-friendly, is not taking up at all. On the contrary, it went down also. And the next question is, why is this oral one not working on the on the market? Why are we not prescribing it? Well, one of the reasons, and I'm just guessing, is because, and the next speakers will talk about this, you cannot measure it in the blood. If you give dydrogesterone orally, you cannot, on the day of the transfer, take a blood test and see the levels are high or low. If you follow that philosophy, you shouldn't do that because you cannot measure it. You can measure it, but then you have to do these expensive assays, which takes time, and this is not workable and not payable either. And I think another reason for that is about safety. And I want to show you a few slides about these safety issues, which I think are important. And people are, a bit reluctant to talk about it because we feel uncomfortable about this. And I think we should talk about it and we should know about it. And I must say, as a doctor, because it's a whole saga about these things, I feel very uncomfortable about it because people say yes, no, and they attack each other and whatever. Okay, everybody has to protect his product, but this is more important for us doctors, for our patients, that we know about it and that we should get a clear answer. Is it or is it not? And it all started with a study that was published in The Lancet, not a minor journal, from Zakout, who is a neonatal cardiologist in the Palestine area. And he, with his team, they realized that there were a lot of babies born with cardiac anomalies. And they had to look after them, which I suppose they didn't like too much because it's always misery for the parents and for these kids. And they did a study to look why in this Palestine area there are so many cardiac anomalies. And they looked into consanguinity, other family members who had cardiac malformations, and they all looked also at certain drugs that they take. And it came out that patients who took oral dydrogesterone, the risk of a congenital heart disease was 2.7 times higher than in the ones who didn't take that. Of course, it's a small study, it's not so big, but you know, it's a warning. What came further was another study, and this is from a complete independent group, because it's on the other side of the border in Israel. And this is Dr. Koren, who is a toxicologist. And he's interested also, he was working for a big insurance company in Israel, and they cover about 3 million patients. And with his database, he could see what kind of medication their patients took during their pregnancy, for example, because they are paying for it. And what he did, he looked at the effect of certain drugs, and one of them was, of course, the dydrogesterone. And again, he saw a clear link, and there is a lot of patients, a clear link between certain malformations and the intake of dydrogesterone in the beginning of the pregnancy. And you see them here. On top of that, he saw if these patients did IVF, these malformations were even more accentuated, as you see on the further column. And then he wrote another article, and you know, I'm very, as a doctor, ashamed about all the hoo-ha that went through it, and the attacks to these different people that it's not true and that they're falsifying, and some articles had to be retracted and whatever. It's all not very nice. But here he wrote an article about all the drugs that we are prescribing, we should not prescribe, and the risk of malformations with the babies. And here you see a meta-analysis with dydrogesterone, which clearly shows that there is a problem in a risk of malformation in early pregnancy. So, in conclusions, I think luteal support needs to be given. I think as soon as you start stimulating your patients and you get high estradiol and progesterone levels, you should give it. It's better safe than sorry. The monitoring of the progesterones, I'll leave to the next speakers. Although there is plenty of studies on luteal phase support, over the last 10 years, our practice has not changed a lot. We give it 1 day later now. That's the only thing we can say, but the rest, it's always been the same. And last but not least, there are some serious indications of teratogenicity of dydrogesterone. And I think the ball is there in the camp of the industry to convince us that it's not, because after all, if it would be an oral support, an oral presentation, tablets, it would be 10 times easier than all the other preparations that we have on the market. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Peter. I think what we're going to do is we're going to have a general discussion at the very end of this session, so then we can talk about all of these presentations together. So on that basis, can I ask my co-chairman, Susanna, if you would introduce the next speaker?
I would like to introduce Dr. Birgit Alsbjerg. and I will a little bit talk about her practice in Slovak. So, pani doktorka získala titul doktora medicíny ešte v roku 2001, od roku 2000.
Graduated in 2001. She specialized in gynecology and obstetrics. She attended courses in reproductive medicine, and currently she works at the fertility clinic as a consultant, and she is the professor associate at the Faculty of Health Aarhus University. And she will speak about
and thank you for the organizing committee and Peter for giving me the opportunity to see your fantastic, beautiful city. We went for a walk this morning. It was beautiful. Hopefully I will be back just as a tourist. Okay. And the headings for today is the luteal phase, and there will be some overlap. Thank you, Peter. I guess the overlap will be the important things. And hopefully you will understand my school English. I have never been in England. I've been in Denmark all my career, and as you, I guess I'm first of all a clinician. I treat patients every day, and that's where my heart is. Okay, let's talk about the luteal phase and the impact of the serum progesterone levels. And this is my conflict of interest. And this is the agenda for today. It will only concentrate on the frozen embryo transfer. And as you see, I listed the free protocol, the natural cycle, the modified cycle, and the hormone replacement therapy. And the quick of you say, oh, she missed one. That's a low stimulation. But there's not a lot of evidence in low stimulation, so I will skip that. And in the end, I will go through, there will be a little bit of overlap, how to increase serum progesterone levels in art. And I will start with this. This is the newest Cochrane, just telling that the quality of evidence is low or even very low. So that will be my fundament for today. And whatever treatment you use for frozen embryo transfer, you can do whatever you want. There's no evidence supporting using one over another. And again, a bit of overlap. I hope we can skip that very quickly. But I just want to say we have been taught this at med school, and we think this is how the patient look. But I just want to remember or tell you that this is mean levels, and we don't treat mean patient. We treat individuals. So just this small study, it's 300 cycles, it's 100 ladies. And look, this doesn't look as in the one before. You see there's like 4 different ovulation compared to the LH peak. The A, we have ovulation before LH peak. That wasn't what I was taught in med school. And then you can look at B and you can look at C. And then we have 2 LH peaks. And you can look at the configuration of the progesterone peak. And it doesn't look similar in all the patients. And then concluded that when does this follicle rupture? About a mean of 22. But if you look at the range, some rupture at 9 and some at 4 centimeters. And then concluded that half of the patient had an unclassical LH peak. This is a bit old study, it's a Polish study, and it's 22 ladies spitting in a cup, and they froze it down, and they kept track of their cycle. And if you look, this is just saliva progesterone, and we don't talk about saliva progesterone, but that's why it's very low progesterone. But it's the mean of the progesterone during the luteal phase. And if you look, I don't know if I can point, you see this patient number 1, it looks like she has a very nice level of progesterone during her luteal phase. But what about this patient 4? Perhaps she won't get pregnant in this because progesterone is very low. And what about 22? Perhaps we shouldn't transfer the frozen embryo transfer in the normal cycle. So just to illustrate my point. And then to the frozen embryo transfer. I'm just a bit curious, who transfer in natural cycle? Can you raise your hand? Yes? Few. We don't. It's just changing all the time, and patient calling in with these LH urine, LH tests, so we don't use it. But I think it's good. But this study, they measured serum progesterone, and they measured it the day before a blastocyst transfer, and it was a retrospective cohort of 300 patients. And they looked at two groups. The one, and that was about one third, had level less than 10 nanogram. And look at the green bar, that's the live birth. And they compared to 2/3 of the patient, they had levels more than 10 nanogram. And you see a significant difference in live birth. So perhaps 1/3 of the patient are not good for true natural cycle. But if you think about the Polish studies, perhaps some of the patients would always be here, but some cycles they will perhaps be here and other times here. But it's not zero. But we would like to have this number instead of this. And this is just because they have two groups. They have the screened embryos and the not screened embryo. And as you see, again, of course, screened embryo, euploid embryos, they have higher pregnancy, live birth rate compared to non-screened, but you see the relation between serum progesterone levels and live birth rate. What should we do? Should we support the natural cycle? Then it's not natural, but we could give a little of progesterone. And there's this meta-analysis. It's not a lot of patients, but I started to tell you the evidence is not very good. But it looks like that supporting the true natural cycle with a little bit of progesterone, it increases the live birth rate. Then we can think, are there other ways to support the true natural cycle? And there's this meta-analysis, and they support with HCG, because we know, Peter showed us nicely, how the peak of LH, HCG, that's LH activity, and perhaps we could just give a little bit of HCG. But you see, no, it doesn't seem to help. I know it's from the same group, and it's not a lot of patients, but it seems it doesn't help to give extra LH activity. And let's hypothesize. Perhaps it's not a lack of LH in the natural cycle, the bad natural cycle. Perhaps it's the corpus luteum deficiency. And now we go for, when we do natural, we do this natural. We trigger with the HCG. It's much easier. We decide when the patient should come and have the transfer. We can go. She should not come Sunday, she can come Saturday or Friday. So that's one we use when we do natural. And is there an effect of adding progesterone in the modified natural cycle? I found this study, again, low evidence, but it shows there are effects of adding progesterone. I found another one, it's Korea, still not a large study, but then you should always seek through literature. And of course, I found studies not supporting adding progesterone. This is the only randomized control study. Sorry, it's a bit few patients, and there's no effect. And I found another one, no effect. In Denmark right now, we have conducted a multi-center study with 600 patients. Hopefully we'll have the results within 2 years. But perhaps some of the patients, they will benefit, perhaps 1/3, and perhaps the other 2/3 will not need it. But you know, randomized controlled studies, we don't look for serum level, we just give some the patient and others don't have it. But don't worry, if you think this natural cycle is just crap, then we can do some hormones instead. And some patients will not be able to have a natural cycle, the egg donation cycles and the polycystic ovarian patients. So this is just to illustrate the hormone replacement treatment. And that was when I got interested in this area. In a period, we changed the luteal phase in these patients with only one vaginal gel in the frozen embryo transfer, and we thought, oh, they're not getting very pregnant, or they have a lot of miscarriage. So for the next period, we increased the dose to 2 vaginal gel. And we made this retrospective analysis, again, low evidence, but it is evidence, I guess. And look at the delivery rate. When we only supported the patient with 1 gel a day, we had 8% live birth rate. And in the next period, we had 20. So we didn't measure serum progesterone at that time, but my interest was awakened. And look at the miscarriage rate. More than 67% miscarriage in the first group. So it seems like they get pregnant, but they lose again if they have very low progesterone support. Then 2 years later, this study was presented by Dr. Jovis. He's a very nice professor from Australia, and I have the privilege to visit him. And if you look, he had very high serum levels, and this is nanomole per liter. And what he found in this cohort of more than 500 single blastocyst transfer, and he used his homemade pessaries. He had the local pharmacy cooking his pessary, and it was quite a good high dose. It was 1200 every day, and the mean serum level was 60. And what he found was that the optimal level was when the serum level was between 70 and 100 nanomole. And too high gave lower live birth rate, and lower level, lower live birth rate. When I came home, I thought, oh, 1 gel a day is not good. 2, it was better. What about 3? So for a period, we treated all our patients. It was not a study, it was just, we changed clinical practice. And we made this retrospective analysis, and we have more than 200 cycles, and none have extra. They were only treated with this gel 3 times a day. And look here, we found the cutoff to be 35 nanomole per liter. And we see half of the patients were below this cutoff. And if we look at the ongoing pregnancy rate, we couldn't wait for live birth. We thought this is very important to have published. And you see 38%, and in the optimal 51%. A lot of study has been going on since, and I've tried to, this is different cutoff and the ongoing pregnancy or live birth rate. And you see here is 10 nanogram, or it's equal 32 nanomole, and a higher cutoff between 10 and 20. And you see, if you use these cutoff, there are significant higher ongoing pregnancy or live birth. And here it blurs out. And what about the miscarriage rate? Again, if you use this cutoff, you will have lower rate of miscarriage rate. And now there will be a little bit of overlap, but I guess that will be the important stuff. What about the vaginal? We try to double the dose with gel, and it seems better, but is it better? This French study shows that if you start with a good starting dose, then you will not have the benefit of doubling the dose. This was a cohort of 200 patients. They had the standard dose of progesterónu, they have 600 milligram, and they measure the serum progesterone level. And this was on it was cleavage transfer, so day 2 of day 3. And you see here is 10 nanogram. That was the cutoff they used. And you see about 1/3 of the patient are below, and they doubled their vaginal dose. And then they measured again 2 days after. But you see, still some of the patients, even though they doubled the vaginal dose, they didn't increase. And what about the reproductive outcome? Because that's the most important factor, isn't it? And what you see, even though they doubled the dose vaginal, you see there was still significant lower live birth rate in the low group. 17 of these patients with the double and 34 for the patient with the optimal level. Then we can go to intermuscular. And this is just 2 mean levels I found. And again, remember, this is from studies, it's mean levels. If you measure, you will find some patients have high, some patients had low. And I looked into to find the optimal progesterone level when we do the intermuscular. And I didn't make a mistake because this is a bit confusing. One study is saying it's better to be higher than 20, but this says it's better to be lower. So low evidence. The only difference in these 2 studies I could find was that this was standardized. When did they measure the serum progesterone level? Here, I couldn't find out. So perhaps that could be the explanation. And I don't know whether any of you have tried intramuscular progesterone. In my clinic, sometimes we use 50. I haven't tried it, but I've seen the patient who have used it. It's not very nice. Okay, and sorry for this small homemade cartoon, but Peter almost showed a nice, perhaps I can have your slide, it's much better than mine. But I tried to illustrate what are we doing when we do the intramuscular. We put it in the muscle, and then it's absorbed by the lymph and the veins, and it goes to the circulation, and then it goes to the uterus. And then we measure something in her arm, the serum level. But what we really want to know is the impact of the uterus or on the ongoing pregnancy. And then Peter showed us this nice slide that if we give something vaginal, we have the first pass effect. And if we combine this with this, what is the cutoff? What is the load? A lot of questions we can't answer yet. Then there's the subcutaneous. It's much more patient-friendly. But we have to remember, look at the serum levels. We had about 100 with 50 intramuscular. Here we have 25. So we can give subcutaneously, but we have very low levels. This is a log scale, but you see after few almost minutes, we have very high concentration, and then it decreases again. And of course, there is a steady state, but you see, again, it's a very low level. And what they say that this is what we aim for. Yeah, this is what we aim for in the natural cycle, where the progesterone comes from the corpus luteum, not from the circulation. So perhaps we should aim for a little bit higher levels. So you can use this in frozen embryo transfer, but don't for the only support. And can we rescue patients with low serum progesterone? And this was also shown by Peter. It's like 3 cohorts. They looked at it's quite a huge study. 1,300 patients with a good level of serum progesterone. They used a cutoff of 9.2. Is that better than 10? No, but they have made different studies, and that's a lower quartile. So it's nothing biological in this cutoff. It's just from another study where they found quartiles. So that's why some use 10. This group use 9.2, and we use 35 nanomole. And you see, this is when they have high progesterone level, and if they don't support, just continue the normal luteal phase support, they have lower live birth rate. And for the next period, they gave a single subcutaneous progesterone administration. And you see now, it seems like they rescued this gap is gone here. So here we have the patient with high, more than 9.2 nanogram, and here we have patient with low. However, there were added one subcutaneous injection. So it seems like we can rescue the patient with low progesterone. And Polysas, I guess he will also go into this study, so I made just the headlines because that's from his group, and he shows the exact same. He just used another cutoff, you say now it's 10.6, but I'm sure he will tell about that. What about the oral? I will skip that because we had a very full walk through, but again, it can't be measured. Good result in IVF. We can do whatever we want in IVF, we were just told, and I agree. And then you have a lot of reference on the risk of congenital heart disease, and of course that's an issue because it seems like, especially in China, they use it. All the studies coming from China, they use it. And it's patient-friendly, and that's what I think is important, but of course we don't want sick children. And yes, it's good results, also in IVF, frozen embryo transfer. And then for a bit new way to administer progesterone. And sorry for this very old slide, 71. It's just 1 year before I was born. And what it shows is we have very good absorption from rectum. This is progesterone, and you see, again, this is a log scale. We have very quick absorption, and of course, there will be some steady state after days. Now in Skive, at my clinic, we tried 1 gel, we tried 2 gel, we tried 3 gel. Why not try 4 gel? Perhaps we could do better. But instead of just filling out the vagina, and perhaps that could be the answer for the question, why giving more is giving lower levels. I think because I've looked into the vagina with free vaginal gel. It's just filled with this, I don't know what you should call it, but perhaps that could be the explanation. So don't just give patients more and more medication if they can't absorb it. So we tried the rectal. So in the morning they have 1 vaginal and 1 rectal, and the same in the evening. And again, it wasn't a study, it was just change in clinical practice. And we have a cohort of almost 300, and now we only do single blastocyst transfer. The other one we could put 2, but we found out we made too many twins, so now we only do single embryo transfer. And what you can see, we increase the mean levels, and the ongoing pregnancy was 44. But look now, have you seen this picture before? You remember Professor Jovic? He had his home-cooked pessaries and had very high levels. He showed that are the progesterone level too high, it seems that the live birth rate will decrease. And see what we found. Now it's other cutoff, you see. But now we have to think about the rectal absorption, the vaginal absorption. It's not the same as just vaginal. So we found that the optimal in this regime was between 28 and 45 nanomole. And what we did, not half of the patients were low, only 10%. But what you saw now was half of the patients ended in this group. So we helped some people, but we did harm in other patients. And just to compare, now it's a comparable cohort, it's single embryo transfer, all of them. And one group had free gel and the other one have 2+2. And you see, we increased significantly the serum level, but look at the ongoing, it's exactly the same. So my next question will be, can serum progesterone be too high? And I guess you know the answer, yes, it seems like. And just to illustrate once again, this is a study with 250 patients, and it's also HRT cycle, and they are giving a lot of progesterone. 400 milligram one day, next day 800, the next day 1200, and then continue with this. And then they started intramuscular, 25, at the embryo transfer, 50, and they continue. Very, very high progesterone dose. And then they looked into serum progesterone levels. And of course, the low quartile is not low, and we wouldn't expect this after this. But look at the live birth rate. Now it's opposite. Now we have the high live birth rate in the low end. So I think progesterone can be too high. We need to look into nature and copy nature. So perhaps you're just more confused. I started with, I only have very low evidence, but let me try to conclude what we don't know. When to measure, which day, and how many days after administration. I can't tell you, but I can tell you what we do in our clinic. We try to make it standardized. And just to show you that even though it's just the same dose for all the patients, we have this fluctuation. And the other day, we do a lot of measurement, and we do it standardized at the first blood sample. So it will be here. And I had one patient, it was nanomole, so it was up here, it was 50. And then the next blood sample is random. And it was just 12 hours after she had administered her progesterone, and it was 8. So you see some patients, they will go up here and down here and up here. But perhaps that's good, because Peter just told us that LH activity in the natural cycle, it will give an up and down progesterone level. So we have to remember this is the mean serum progesterone of 50 patients. And again, we treat individualized. And just to show, it's not only cyclogest and crenone, luteinous, and it will be whatever. But you see, this is only 6 patients, and even though there's a 20% difference from the highest to the lowest. And what to do if progesterone is too low? There's 2 studies showing that we could rescue if we find, but we have to do it in time. We can't wait till the positive test, that's too late. We have to do around the time of transfer. But 2 studies shows that an extra progesterone for the right patient, that will seems to save some pregnancies. And can it be too high? I think you got the point. I think progesterone in this frozen embryo transfer cycle where we want to look like nature, this is not IVF with very high estrogen. This is more like the natural cycle. And that's the next question. Is there different cutoff? I showed you there's different cutoff whether you use intramuscular, or you use rectal or vaginal. What about different categories of patients? What about patients with high BMI? What about age? And what about endometriosis? We know endometriosis patients have a progesterone receptor resistance, so perhaps they need higher progesterone. So, sorry, more questions, more research to be done. And this is all my nice colleagues from, and one male in the middle, Professor Humaydan. Thank you.